Welcome, everyone. Well, first of all, I'm Vic Pearlbox, the president of the Minnesota Watercolor Society. And I want to welcome everyone here to the Society March members meeting and demo. And I have a couple of things I just wanted to mention. First of all, are there any new or recently new members here tonight? Raise your hand. Couple. Okay, great. Welcome, welcome. And if you're connecting on Zoom and you're a new member, why don't you use the chat feature and just announce yourself, just so we can recognize you. Thank you. I wanted to mention a couple of things on volunteering. We have had a couple of volunteers step up to meet some of the needs that we have. And we have Buffy Shannon, who will be co-chairing the spring show. And Lori Murphy Graffing will co-chair the fall show. Are either Buffy or Lori here tonight? Lori? Let's give a round of applause to Lori for volunteering. Thank you so much. There are still openings, and I think they're in the newsletter, but we have openings to fill for signature membership, treasurer, workshop co-chair, and vice president. And if you sign up for vice president, you can work with me for the rest of this year. And my term is up in February of 23, but so those positions will be opening up in 23, February. And also we're planning for a Members Day event this upcoming June. And in the past, Mary Sue Kruger, is Mary Sue here tonight? She's not here tonight. Mary Sue I found out, had organized this event for more than 15 years. And so she was ready to step away from doing that. So we have one individual that is interested in organizing, and I am looking for a co-chair for that person. And it's a 3-month time frame commitment because the event is in June, and then we do it every other year. So it'd be a good opportunity to kind of learn the ropes of how we work together in this organization. So please talk to me tonight if you can catch me, if you're interested in any of these openings. If you can't catch me tonight, my contact information is on the website and in the newsletter, or you can talk to any board member. We have several board members here tonight, and hopefully we can answer your questions. And that is all I have. I will turn it over to Mary, and we'll get on with our demo.
Before we begin our meeting, we need a few reminders. The first one is that the art show list of the people who are accepted into the art show will be out tomorrow on March 11th, if you're waiting for that. And then on April 25th, there will be a Zoom presentation for the art show reception. It won't be live, it will be through Zoom this year. Those of you who are here through Zoom, please put your questions tonight in the chat, and then we'll have Wendy pass those on. And if you're here, if you have a question, please ask it and then wait a minute for me to repeat it in the mic so the Zoom people can hear it. And then Dan will answer after that. I first knew about tonight's artist about 4 or 5 years ago when I lived in Eau Claire, and I walked into a gallery there. My friend had a pastel show, but I kept looking across the room at some paintings I saw. Intriguing. Fast forward to 2 years later, I was now living in the cities. I joined the Minnesota Watercolor Society, and I heard about Dan from a lot of different people in this group. Found out that he was past president of the group, and he teaches workshops, and he's well known and liked here in the Twin Cities area. Now I'm programming co-chair, and I wanted to be sure to ask him to do a demo for us. He said yes, and he's here tonight in spite of the fact that he had knee replacement surgery only 2 weeks ago. So tonight we'll see how Dan uses watercolor and acrylics, negative shapes, and linkage of similar values to create his paintings. I'm very happy to welcome our demo artist for March, Dan Wiemer.
Yeah, this has been a great organization. My wife and I, we moved to the Twin Cities in 1986. And I got plugged in, and I remember I got talked into being the president of the group, and I was the president probably 5 or 6 presidents ago. I was between Andy Evenson and colors, the wonderful colors. Who? No, she's great. Catherine Erding.
Oh, yeah.
So I was between 2 amazing artists. So let's hook this in.
Put it around.
Put it around your ear.
Put it around your ear.
The other way. Yeah, yeah, like that. Oh.
How about that? Oh, there we go. So anyway, I got involved. It's an amazing organization, and I think it's exciting to see how many different ways you can work with water media. This is my 50th year of painting. I'm 57, and I started painting when I was 7, and I've been painting continuously. So when I was little, I got those Walter Foster books, you know, painting seascapes and all the little details and everything. And my parents gave me $5, and I went to this artist in Elmhurst, Illinois, Wednesday afternoons for my art lesson. And I did acrylic painting when I was a kid, and I just told everybody that that's what I was going to be when I grew up, was going to be an artist. And my father thought that was a good idea, which was really neat. He was a landscape architect, and he was very talented, and he worked for the parks, and he drew plans up, and I would help him color in his plans for parks and bike paths and things. So that was exciting. I went off to Iowa State University, and I got a graphic design degree, and I graduated in 1986. And that was the very last year that they sent someone through college without any computer experience. And the teachers actually said, we're doing a disservice because everything is changing and you guys don't have any. So I'm of the era, like that point and earlier, people could draw better. They had better hand skills, and we had to render everything. I drew my typography for my ad layouts and everything. And so I worked for a short while as a little junior art director, and I became an illustrator, and I illustrated out of Minneapolis and Chicago, but I really wanted to just paint. And I had a illustration teacher at Iowa State tell me that if you're going to be known, you have to have a recognizable style. And I remember I got a pizza and a 12-pack of beer, and I went back to the dorm room, and I thought, I'm going to get a style by Monday. And I tried pointillism, and I tried cubism, and I tried all this stuff. And I think back of how silly that is, because it's like trying to get a personality in 2 days. It just takes a lifetime. And actually, it took me about 20 years for me to figure out what I loved. And I had this real breakthrough. I was doing a lot of scratchboard work and a lot of food illustration for Pillsbury and General Mills. And I had this little kind of this scratchboardy woodcut enlarged style. And I went up to Grand Marais about 20 years ago, and I walked into Sievertson Gallery in Grand Marais. And there was this big picture of this, it was called the Jack Pine. It was a pine tree over Lake Superior. And I looked at it and I was amazed. And I asked the owner, I go, who did that? Is that some artist from the Twin Cities? Tom Thompson. I've never heard of this person. No, silly. That's somebody from the Group of Seven from early Canadian, Toronto painter, 1910, 1920. I'm like, I got to find everything out about this group. And so anyway, these group of artists, they lived in Canada. They were graphic designers turned illustrators turned painters. And that was the same progression that I made. And they worked during the arts and crafts period. And I like that look. And I like those colors. So I threw myself into it. And if you look at all this stuff, my work has a real Canadian style. Robert Jen, if some of you are familiar with him, he worked out of Vancouver. He passed away about 5 or 8 years ago. Another Canadian artist, Mike Svab. They have a chunky, kind of a woodcut look. And my work has a chunky woodcut look. I'm like all watercolor artists. I've got about 500 books. You know, we always buy all these books, and I don't buy how-to books anymore, but I buy biographies. I'm fascinated to see what artists were thinking. So I'm going to jump in here and start painting, and then I'll probably backtrack and show you a couple interesting things. But when I teach my workshops, it's really interesting how some people understand negative shape making and some people don't. And I always tell people, are we going okay? I always tell people, if you took a board and painted it dark green, and you were going to do a woodcut of a pine tree, you have to remove everything that's not the tree. So what you're doing is you're creating that tree shape by the shape around it. And so you're creating that pine tree negatively. So printmaking, people that do silk screen and linoleum cut and batik and woodcut, they all work with negative shapes. So I'll show you here. Let's see if we can get the camera on this. And do I need to center it? Should I go this way or this way? I guess whatever way. I guess it's on the diagonal, isn't it? Anyway, I'll just jump in here. Okay. So there's 4 different ways you can make a shape. The most obvious is a positive shape. So that's a dark positive. I just took a brush and painted a line. And okay. So dark positive, light positive, because I painted the shape. Now I'm going to come on down here and I'm going to do a light negative shape. And so I created that light negative shape by the shape around it. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do a dark negative shape. And again, I'm just painting around this shape. This seems pretty foreign to watercolor artists because most watercolor artists are never taking goopy acrylic like this and coming in. So this seems very crude, but dark, this is dark against light. So this is dark positive, this is light positive, and these 2 shapes down here I created by the shape around it. This is a light negative, and this is a dark negative. In transparent watercolor, we're used to doing these 2 right here. We're not used to using opaque paint. But this last one right here, this dark negative shape, I can attack it two ways. I can come in with opaque and paint around it, or I can paint mask around it. Paint the shape, take the mask off, and then I have a transparent light and a acrylic dark. That's what all these paintings are. I divide things into a highlight shape and a shadow shape. I paint the shadows in acrylic. I paint the highlights in watercolor. So I'm gonna kind of, it seems real scientific. It'll make a little bit more sense. So this is how if you look at all the watercolor books, if you take an Andy Evenson workshop, if you see Alvaro and all these, Joseph Zbukvich, the best watercolor artist in the planet, Don Andrews, they all want to link their shadow shapes. And you can read all these books, and I can highlight the same line in every single book. So to try to simplify a scene, you need to try to simplify it into a dark shape and a light shape. And it's a wonderful exercise. I want to get this so that it reads square up on the screen here. Do I turn the camera or do I turn the table? I want this thing to look like that right there. Yeah, that's getting more square. Yeah, it's probably got to get closer to me. Yep. Okay, yep. So right out there. Okay, very good. So this is I was sitting in Stillwater, and these were three women walking to this trolley. And I actually painted this really quick, and I surprised myself because it was so good. I turned it into a full color painting, and the painting wasn't very good. And it's amazing how often it is where you can go from a fresh little sketch and you try to come up large and it doesn't translate. You lose something in translation. Part of it is you engage your analytical brain and you put too much detail and you overthink the big colorful one. This is another little piece of a father and a son on a beach in Scotland. And I just took my little, I come out with one tube of paint, two brushes and one tube of paint. And I sit down there and I paint these little black and white studies. And being from the ad agencies, sometimes I come out with markers, a gray marker and a black marker. And it's wonderful to try to simplify a complicated scene by just creating a highlight shape and a shadow shape. So this is another interesting exercise. So this picture is just a shoreline up on Lake Superior. And I'm so enamored with the tree on the edge of the rocky point. I know it's so cliche, but I think I've painted it 20 times and I'll paint it 100 more. In fact, I'm going to paint that tonight. I'm such a sucker for a cliched little tree on the corner. But so this is positive. I created this black shape positively. I put my paint brush in black paint and I painted a positive linked together shape. This is the exact same scene done on black paper. So this whole piece of paper is black and I took white paint and I surrounded the black shape. So now this black shape was created negatively. And if you look at the difference, there's this wonderful woodcut quality of surrounding a shape and creating a negative shape. I don't know if you can kind of see way over here. You guys are going to be able to see it better. This boat, that's me in Puerto Rico. And I told Andy Evenson to go pretend to reach into that boat. So I took a snapshot and I painted this when I came home. But that boat is made up of a shadow shape and a highlight shape. And I surrounded the shadow shape with masking fluid, painted the shadow in acrylic, peeled the masking fluid off and painted the highlight in watercolor. So the highlights are transparent and the shadows are a little bit less transparent with the acrylic. Okay, so part of the reason I did this, I went down this road was it really is a unique look. And sometimes I've overdone it and gone too far down one way. And it's like, oh my God, I'm trying too hard. But whatever, I've worked enough that I've got a feel that people know my stuff when they see it. What I've got here, I have got a tree. I've got a tree on a rocky shore. I'm going to do a night scene. I'm going to do a Northern Lights scene here. And I have got some thin, I don't know if you can see, it's probably hard for you to see this, but I have some thin little openings between my mask. I have painted around the tree and I have painted around the shadows on the rocks, and I've connected I've linked all these things together. I'm going to paint this first pass in acrylic. I'm going to take the mask off, and then I'm going to paint the rest in watercolor right over the top. And everybody always says, why don't you do it the other way around? Why don't you paint the acrylic and then mask and paint the acrylic on top of the watercolor? I don't like to pull mask off of watercolor that's already down. And I know there are some artists that do it, but it always seems like it takes off a little bit, and I don't like that. So I am going to just jump right in. Does anybody have any questions right now? I'm probably blocking the same two people, but so when I start these paintings, I'm obsessed with creating contrasts. And there's value contrast, there's intensity contrast, and there's temperature contrast. Value is so important. When you paint watercolor, you got to know if something is dark against light or light against dark. And so I'm always thinking about contrast when I do my painting. I'm also thinking about how the eye flows into a scene. You enter a scene from the bottom on a landscape. Your eye comes into the scene from the bottom. There's Ian Roberts has a book on plein air painting, and there's a CD in it. And it's so amazing to watch how he guides the little cursor through his landscapes coming up from the bottom. I always like to try to have the eye kind of go away from the focal point initially. That stream, I love to do the zigzag road. If you look at the center one over here, is Cascade River up on the North Shore. As you come in from the bottom, your eye moves to the right, and then it moves back again to the left across that little area, and it kind of zigzags back, and it actually gets back to that little warm little piece where the sun is hitting that hillside, that little warm little piece. And I think that to me, creating a kind of a pathway for the eye is even more important than creating a focal point, because it's like I would rather have someone travel down. Okay, so I'm going to squirt some acrylic out here and just this is a real sloppy phase. Acrylic dries darker and watercolor dries lighter. And that's a tricky thing. Most people, when I teach a watercolor workshop, most people can't paint dark enough. They can't get it right the first time. And because they can't get it right the first time, they don't paint it dark enough. They come back at it again and try to get it darker, and they can't get it darker. And by the time they get the value good enough, they've hit it 3 times and they've kind of overworked it. So I always, when I paint straight watercolor, I always think I want to get really bold and almost bolder than I want to do. Okay, I just like to show this. Even though I've laid my mask down, I use just a big giant Winsor Newton masking fluid. And what I do is I take the bottoms of the cups you buy at the gas station for pop, and I cut the bottoms of them off, and I have about 100 of these little cups around my studio. And the thing that's nice is you can get it to a point. And so what I do, I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to kind of show you my process. I generally pour a cup full of mask, and then I'll take an acrylic brush, And I generally use these round little Winsor Newton collegiate brushes. They're not super expensive. When you get a brush wet, you got to get the water all the way to the center. And then you soap it. And that's the wetting agent. And you get that soap all the way to the middle. And then you get a brush that you can use for mask over and over and over, and you don't wreck your brushes. You can never use a natural hair brush in masking. It'll just kill it. So I get the brush all soaped up and I really soap it up. And so that's when I go in here and what I did was I painted around the shadow shape. Most of you use mask to save the whites. I use mask to surround the darks. And it sounds like the same thing, but it's very different. So as I paint, I just showed you that. I'm not gonna, I've already painted it. This is a tedious process that you don't need to see that. But so when I paint my mask on, I'm actually thinking about doing a linoleum scoop. So this tree right here, I'm thinking about scooping out wood around this tree as I paint that mask on. And I try to have the stroke be round on the entrance and round on the exit. That's why my stuff has all these jelly beans, because I like that jelly bean shape. And sometimes I start a stroke this way and I have to turn around and bring the stroke the other way and connect them. So matte medium. Matte medium is acrylic polymer without any pigment in it. It looks like Elmer's glue. I always put a puddle of matte medium before I'm gonna paint my acrylic. What that does is it evens it out. Some acrylics are glossier than others. And what gloss does is it really kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, because watercolor is such a matte. It's so matte. There's no gloss when you paint watercolor. Okay, so I've got a handful of colors here. This is the sloppy phase of the painting. I paint acrylic very differently than I paint watercolor. I scrub acrylic on, and I would never scrub watercolor on. I'm much more deft with watercolor. So I just always kind of reach in and grab. I reach into I pull colors out, and I reach in and I just make a matte medium slurry. And you don't have, even though I use tube acrylics, I use heavy body acrylics, you don't have to paint them so thick like toothpaste. You can kind of create a little bit of a more of a watercolory feel to them. So with a lot of water and a lot of matte medium, I've got something that I can get fairly expressive with. This is a night scene. So that's kind of I would never like lick like a cat licks a painting. That always drives me crazy when people paint watercolors and it's like lick, 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 lick. It's just like, just paint it right the first time and don't obliterate it. So essentially this is just a lot of, I'm in the distance here. I've got a little bit of atmospheric perspective. I do want to get much darker. Use some, put a little phthalo green. That'll almost get to be a black. So I love my white pine trees, and some of the best white pines that I've come across are in like northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin cemeteries. And so I'll go into those cemeteries and I'll take some pictures, and I've got a file of beautiful white pines, and then I drop them into kind of a boundary water setting and fool everybody. So I'm trying to, like watercolor, you don't want to mix it so much that you just mix a pile of gray and you don't have any expression. I always like to have a couple things engaging at the same time. So there's a little bit of variety in color. There can be little color shifts here and there. Let's see here. You know, I'm a one at a time guy. I have a hard time having a bunch going at the same time. It seems like the ones that I can't finish, I never finish. And it seems like when I get on a roll and I do one and I've got it and I finish it, but there are some paintings that I like, they haunt me and I have to turn them around. I go, I can't look at you anymore. But no, I've always been a one at a time guy. And I know that there are people that can get and work on a whole bunch at the same time. You can't see it. You'll be able to see it later when you come up, but I'm kissing out beyond the mask just a little bit to give the indication that it's a woodcut. I'm creating these little, I don't know if this is it in the middle. Okay, you can't hardly see. There's hardly any. It just looks like a big blob, but oh, you wait, it'll be pretty. So again, I mean, this is kind of painting blind. This is kind of, I'm not going to know what I get until, but anybody who's painted mask, it is like a tattoo. If you're sloppy with your mask and you take it off, it's going to look sloppy. It's not going to magically get good. Let's see here. Okay. We'll just do some of that and that. So then down here, these are essentially, this is kind of the North Shore rock. I'm going to have some cracks. Could beef that up a little bit in value back here, I think. Yeah, I'm painting on just 140-pound Arches cold press. A lot of the ones behind me, I work on Arches hot press. It gives me just a sharper, crispy edge. So you'll see this when this comes off, but this painting I'm doing right now, a lot of this water is 99% covered up with mask. And I'm just going to get just little tiny pieces. Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, I was afraid of that one. I've got there's kind of this lavender is a light ultramarine blue. And then I really like Quinn burnt orange. And then I've got a little phthalo green and cobalt turquoise and cobalt violet. And so I'm just gonna cover all of my openings. And this is really interesting. So I don't know if you can't see that stroke. But as I stroke that more and more and more, I can see where the open paper is that's taking the acrylic. It's essentially like batik. If anybody has ever batiqued, you're putting wax on the fabric and it's keeping the ink off of it. And the little areas between the wax takes the ink and you bring it out. And so this is essentially a batik method. Okay, I'm almost done with my acrylic phase. I'm just looking for little openings. There's a couple right here. You can see how the paper is taking that. Okay, that's kind of purpley. Yeah, yeah, I do. A lot of times I'll paint the whole paintings with a round like this, but I'm not wild about this garish phthalo green up here. I want to knock that down just a little bit, and then I'll dry it. If you want to knock a color down, you always put a little bit of the opposite on it. So I'm putting a little of that quin orange on top of that garish green. Okay, so it looks real juvenile and it looks real kind of spastic at this point, but when this comes off, it creates such a wonderful stylized, yeah, I'll show you. I'll do a little peek, a peekaboo. Okay, so let me hit this with a hair dryer and dry this off. And then, oh, I probably don't want to have the hair dryer right next to the microphone. All right, let's see if we can. The worst thing to do is to be impatient and try to take it off while there's still some wet acrylic because you smear it across the. I'm not smart enough to know how to put my thing in the same way that I did before. All right, there we go. Anyway, okay, so I'm gonna try to, if you get a little wet spot of acrylic, it can be a real disaster on a nice, beautiful white sky. Say that again. You don't. You just say that was dumb. Generally, I really give it that extra little bit. But see, I don't mind some of these little extraneous little kick out pieces because it gives this. And when I paint water, I always think about like brickwork. I think of masonry bricks. I like it when two little ellipses come together and there's that little connecting point. What's this little thing? It's kind of like, it's just a mask pickup. They sell it right next to the mask. It's almost like a piece of a crepe sole of a shoe is what it's made out of. Mask eraser, mask lifter. So a lot of times when I get to this phase, it's like that great blue heron over there. If I do my masking well, then I come back with the watercolor and it's almost like a coloring book. You know, I think of it like a stained glass window where the acrylic is the grout and the watercolor is the transparent stained glass. Okay. So then I get this real graphic skeleton. I kind of call it the fish bones of the piece. And so this is this connected shadow shape. A lot of times I'll come back and I'll fix areas like that might need a little twig or something that connects that or something. But so that's kind of the acrylic phase of this one. Sometimes I'll go back and what I'll do is I'll mix like 10% tube acrylic and 90% matte medium. And if you look at that waterfall piece, there's some strokes in it where it's a real veiled acrylic. It's almost a semi-transparent acrylic and it really bridges the gap nicely between watercolor and acrylic. This is very hard edged, very graphic. And this is going to be a nice contrast with these northern lights that I'm going to paint. So just thinking about this picture, my eye kind of comes in and kind of hits this diagonal right here. So instead of having the northern lights go the same direction, I'm going to make a biased. I want the eye to come up and kind of go this way and maybe come back. I don't want to go and keep leading the person that way. So I like to bring a person in and bring them back. So I'm always thinking about how can you how can you prolong the journey of someone entering into the painting? So I'll start to just see what I've got. I know it's a nocturne, but I can see how much color. A lot of times when I paint a nocturne, I use too much color and then I try to knock it down later. I know everybody, when they watch on Zoom, what color is that? And what brush, what number brush is he using and everything, but what I was going to do is I was going to try to just start to tint some of this back and keep that little edge, the highlight on that edge. Can't see the bottom. Okay, I think I got to paint way up here, don't I? Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm going to just start to blacken some tone right now. The shoreline. And I still hold true to this kind of this linear pattern that I create with my mask. I kind of have a stripy patterned look to my paintings. What I should have done probably is the sky first, but I'm trying to. All right. Okay, let me drop in some of these northern lights and see if I can make it work. I'm going to come back and look at this. Okay. So the northern lights are tricky. You can't paint light watercolor on top of dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create this negative highlight shape. I'm going to try to put some light. I'm going to get the whole sky wet first. I'm going to try to paint this northern light shape, and then I'm going to come and surround it with the darks. So the darks surround the northern lights, and I don't know, there's one way over there. That's a nice one. If I could do one like that, that would make me happy, but there's no guarantees though. Under pressure here. So, you know, anybody that's tried to do a big wet on wet thing, it's always kind of a hair on fire kind of experience. So the key is knowing how much water is in your brush and how much water is in the paper. And whether you do crazy stuff like I'm doing with, if you just paint straight watercolor, the good watercolor artists know how much water is in the paper and water in the brush. And as that paper starts to dry down, you want to have less water in your brush. You want to have thicker paint. And so if you watch a really skilled watercolor artist, let's say Andy Evenson or Alvaro, they have thick paint going on damp paper instead of a whole bunch of water in their brush going in and getting all sorts of bleeds. They have total control. I've never seen a person paint with as thick a paint as Alvaro Castagnet. He almost stuck a brush right in the tube and painted it on the paper and didn't use any water at all. He used very little water, which was pretty amazing. So I'm going to get I don't know if I don't have my big wash brush, but this is gonna do it for me. So put just a little while that's still wet, get a little bit of a glow on that. Oops, I'm painting too low, you can't see it. Okay. I got to paint way up here. Huh? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to get my paper towel all ready. I like to, normally when I work big on a full sheet, I have it stapled down to a piece of plywood. I'm a soaker in the bathtub and staple it down. There's nothing like it to me. So everything I do is pretty much soaked in the bathtub, staple it down, and then you're working on just a real flat surface. I think watercolor and acrylic dry a little bit differently. Is this up far enough? Can you see that? I'm going to try to kind of get this evenly wet. I love the acrylic that I can just paint right over the top of it. And it stays put. It's because it's plastic. Okay, so I've got my thing fairly evenly covered. So I'm going to start to engage some of the Northern Lights colors. A lot of it is kind of that chartreusey green. I got to get okay, this is how the pros do it. Okay, so here I am. I'm coming with a little bit of my chartreusey for my Northern Lights. I'm going to try to not, I'm going to have it overlap, a nice overlap on that tree right there. Okay. Put just a little bit of rose in there, permanent rose. Oh, that's not the right color for Northern Lights. What am I thinking? Okay, I'll do a little more of this and a little. And then I've got to try to get that paper to dry down just where I want it. And then I'm going to paint the dark sky into that, surround that. So the key is when I come in with my blue. I'm going to kind of use cobalt blue and Payne's gray. I'm going to try to come in, and you know how when you paint on wet, it crawls a little bit and then stops. It's kind of a guessing game to see how far you can get it to get it right. In a perfect world, I use a little less water and a little more pigment, but it's going to want to roll all over the place. When I paint over the top of the acrylic, sometimes I have to come back later with a paper towel or a Q-tip and pull some of the paint off that dries on the top of the acrylic. In some cases, I've actually masked on top of the acrylic and painted the Northern Lights and then taken the mask off, but that's pretty tedious. So I'm going to just start. This blue is pretty happy. It's pretty bright for a night sky. So I do need to work in a little bit more of a Payne's gray and knock that down a little bit. Doesn't have to be quite that. But I've got to work with pace. Might have to shoot a little. Yeah, you could, but the water over the top of gouache is going to lift it. You could use gouache if you put a little matte. You could use watercolor if you wanted to. If you wanted to put a little matte medium over the top of it, just gouache picks up with water. You know, it's hard to see when I'm turning it away from you, but you got to give me a little. Anytime you do a watercolor, the thing that makes watercolor so wonderful and so maddening is when it looks right, when it's wet, it's wrong. You've got to have that faith that it's going to keep changing. And so there's some things I like about it. And sometimes I think when you're in a phase, you know, we change the things that are going to end up being good and we leave the things that are going to end up being bad. You know, you walk around a room in a watercolor workshop and sometimes people have a really good thing going. And then by the time you come back around 15 minutes later, they've destroyed the good thing and they've kept the bad thing. And I'm like, oh, you should have messed with the other part of it and left the. So there's just a nice, exciting thing happening. Some of this down here on the bottom, this watermark. I could kind of head it off at the pass a little bit. It's going to dry much lighter. I always make a little pointer, and sometimes when an area is a little down swoop in the paper and it's going to potentially cause trouble later, I'll make a little pointer and I'll pull a little of that water and a little of that pigment out. I don't want that spot to be so dark right there. And that should fill in on its own. So, you know, every shape changes what's around it. And now that I've done this, I want to make this bottom part of the water and the bottom part of the rocks much darker. So I think I'm going to let this pour for just a little bit more and dry on its own. And then I think I might hit it with a dryer and try to stop it where it's in its tracks a little bit. But there's some parts that I like. Those of you that have used Arches paper your whole life, boy, I think it's changed a lot. Does anybody else? I mean, it used to be the gold standard, and I mean, I painted on Arches paper since, I don't know, 75, and it's not like it used to be. It's not like the good old days. The good old days. Oops, did I just kick the camera here? Let me try to. Oh, is it really loud? Am I blasted? Yeah, let's do that. Can I put it up? Yeah, put it anywhere. Just find a spot. Thank you so much. All right, I'll just I'll kind of clean up this water down here a little bit. I'd like to bring some darks into this water. What this will do is it'll make my shore stand out a little bit more too. Ooh. Do a little. It's interesting this, I kind of got into, I did a workshop in Arizona and a woman had this Daniel Smith absorbent ground, and she brought in and we were kind of playing with that for a little bit, and that is interesting stuff. I don't know if you've ever used it. It looks like white gesso and you paint it on a piece of masonite and you almost can get something that's gets to be a little bit more like watercolor paper. It's really kind of fun to play around with. Okay, so right now I'm gonna just hit this with the hair dryer and then pretty much check to see what I've got. But I like building that foreground up with a lot of nice dark. I kind of like that little bit of green that I brought in at the end, made it so it wasn't so cold and the wonderful thing that we've got when we work on paper is how we can crop things so easily. And the reason I say that is just looking at my composition. I almost want to crop 4 inches off the top and 2 inches off the bottom. Just because it would make it a better piece. I would zero in a little bit more like that. I'm pretty happy with some of these areas right in here. In a perfect world, this is a little light. I don't know if you can see it up on the top part. I would like it. I would have liked to have it gone up to a much darker, richer thing. And then somebody's going to ask, well, can you get it to that point now? I love to disguise it with one pass, but I probably could spritz water on it and do it. I think there would be a break in it. So I'm probably not going to do it. I would probably crop a chunk off the top. But anyhow, so that gives you a sense of how I make what I have here. I'm gonna pull this one over. Let's see if I can walk. This was piece is really interesting that I'm holding here. This was I went kind of at the beginning of COVID. I really didn't paint, and we go down to Florida to Sarasota, and I brought paper and plywood and all my gear down there, and I did a big painting down there. So I'm in warm Florida, and I painted this Northern Lights piece down there. But if you can see I guess I could hold it up, but the darkness, the richness of this up here, this is more dramatic and striking than this is a little pasty. So I kind of like that. And then, so then I just take a little bit of, it doesn't take a whole lot, but a little tiny brush and some white. Paint little stars that aren't round, little Saturns. Just a couple. So anyway, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up and take some questions, but this is kind of how I work. I try to find this overall descriptive shadow shape, and I try to create that before. A lot of times what I'll do is I will take, if I have a photograph, I know a lot of you work with photographs, I love putting tracing paper over the top of a photograph and taking a black marker and drawing the shadow shape. It forces you to not see the detail and you create this big linked together skeleton. A lot of times I'll take that and I'll either project it on paper or I'll go to Kinko's and blow it up and put it on my light table and trace that shape. And then I surround that shape with mask, paint it in acrylic, and away I go. And sometimes I go back and forth and remask and change. And sometimes a half watercolor, half acrylic turns into an all acrylic. But there's a nice contrast between this hard crackle edge and this real soft wet on wet. So, yay. How long did that take? About 45 minutes or an hour? 1 hour? Okay. Nobody likes to sit through the long, arduous demo. We know how that goes.
No more questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Just to remind everyone that next month, there's no demo. It's just the art show, or I shouldn't say just the art show. It's the art show. And then in May, we'll be back here again with Jim Turner.
Oh,
And
I gotta
thank you,
come to
Dan.
see Jim.
Yeah.
Jim is wonderful. Yeah, and I will not even bashfully, but I'll say that these prints are for sale. All the little ones are $40. And if you want any of the larger ones, they're probably $160 to $180, somewhere in there. But if you want to buy a little print, you surely can. But thank you, guys. Yes. Where do I show my work? My biggest galleries are in Seaverton and Grand Marais, and then in Duluth and Bayfield. I'm kind of wrapped around Lake Superior. And I'm going to go over to Door County. My aim is to work towards Toronto, across that northern tier. And I'm in Eau Claire, I'm in Hudson. I need to find another gallery in Minnesota. I was in frame shops, high-end frame shops love people that sell paper prints because they sell them paper print and then they get the money from the framing. So I've found that approaching a high-end frame shop that has a gallery in it is better than a gallery that's stuffy and just wants originals. And I sell my originals. I do about a dozen big art fairs and I'm in a dozen galleries. So that's where I'm at right now. But in the Midwest, I make my money by selling paper prints. And so you show them the $3,000 original and you sell them the $40 small one, but that's okay with me. But thanks, you guys. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many different ways you can go. Fred, you paint watercolor, you paint acrylic like watercolor.
You know, kind of both, yeah, but I'm with you. I use a heavy body acrylic, but I can use it just like a watercolor, and people think I've done a watercolor.
Yeah.
It's an acrylic.
Yeah. Yeah, so even though I came at this acrylic fairly thick, sometimes I mask around a shape, and within that shape in acrylic, it's very semi-transparent and flowy like watercolor. And I'll have the option to go to toothpaste if I need to go to toothpaste, but I like the variety of the heavy body acrylics in the tubes. So, yes. Yes. And that's where the matte medium comes in. So if you want to really dilute that acrylic way down, it doesn't hold there's a viscosity problem. And that's why if you take just a little bit of tube acrylic and use the matte medium, then it evenly flows and takes and holds together. The matte medium is the key for that. So I'm always using a lot of water and a lot of matte medium. The matte medium is kind of the binder that holds that very thin veil of acrylic in place. Just water won't do it. It loses it a little bit. Yeah. The fluid. I have some and I've used it. I don't know. I'm just a creature of habit. I think that's what most artists are. I have seen people that have masked around something and used watercolor and then covered it with matte medium and then poured over the top of it, and their watercolor is sealed and it looks a little more like watercolor. You know what I mean? And I've even seen people that almost do a spray fix on top of watercolor with mask around it, and then it holds its integrity. But, I mean, like Catherine Herding, and, you think of Roland Roycroft, if anybody has seen his book, a lot of masking and pouring and masking and pouring. It's a beautiful look, but you do lift a little of that hard edge. I'm kind of obsessed with this hard edge woodcut look thing, I guess, so. But
Your original, how do you varnish your originals, or do you put them under glass?
I put them under glass, and I'm trying to, I've done a couple where I've painted gloss on them and then painted the last thing in matte. But I'm more of just a traditional matte and glass guy, and glass is way too heavy. And, people want something, a lot of times they want something contemporary where they don't want glass. But the frame shop said that wrapped canvas is the death of them because people don't want to pay for the framing, but. So, I mean, do you?
I varnish my watercolors. I'll either use gold wax or I'll use spray varnish.
Yeah,
But with a watercolor, I put one coat of gloss to bring up the color, but I finish it matte
yes.
because watercolor is not gloss.
Yeah, but gloss really does bring up the colors wonderfully. It makes the darks so much deeper and richer, but then you've got to finish it with the mattes. Otherwise, a glossy watercolor looks bad. Yeah, and that's another reason why I use this matte medium, because this Quinn burnt orange is a glossy. It's a little glossier, and so is phthalo green. The other ones are kind of matte, but that matte medium I know to put in that to knock that gloss down. So, yeah. Anybody else? Come up here and look at it. I don't know. Oh, you can't. But anyway, like I said, it's for what it is. You could kind of see my process. This is a little pasty up here, and I got some interesting little strokes up here that I'm not wild about, but it's my method. So say that again. Oh, will I take the tape off? Yeah, sure. The big reveal. Oh no. Yeah, like I said, when I tape down paper that's about a little smaller than this, I'll tape it down, but this size and larger, I'll soak it and staple it down to a piece of plywood. Yeah. I don't know if you guys are, when you put a piece of paper in a bathtub, it gets about 3% larger. And then you put that wet piece of paper on a plywood, and I just go bang, 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 staple around the edges. And what a 22 by 30 inch piece of paper, it stretches more the short way. It wants to pull the edges up. And so I let it pull the edges up. I don't try to tape the edges down. I just let the edges cup up, and then I just tape. Because if you try to tape the edges down while it's trying to pull, it'll almost pull the staples out. But, a lot of people are afraid, the people that used to get the gum tape and get that wet. I tried that one time. What a disaster. I mean, that was such a sloppy, crazy mess. And I'm like, I don't ever want to do this again. You can keep those. You got anything else? I'll trade you for something else. But okay, I'm having trouble with my tape here. Just give me a second.
That's how I learned.
Irving Shapiro, the book, I had his book and I've lent it out and I've since lost it. But, I tried to paint his pictures. And then I finally dawned on me, he was painting on Crescent cold press watercolor board, the old stuff that was really good. And they don't make it anymore. And it was my favorite surface. And I bought some of that probably 1986, 88, and painted it. And it's like, oh, okay. Now my stuff looks like Irving Shapiro's. And the surface you can build up some darks on that. And they're so beautiful. The quality of paper and watercolor board has just, I know.
When Eric Girl was my instructor, that was 19.
That's amazing. You got me by a couple of, you're making that up. I can't believe it. Well, look at how much better it looks without the tape on it. Okay. Look at that. Hmm? Wow. Ooh, ah. All right. Thank you, guys.